A severed, bloody head hovers in midair, its sharp halo radiating like arrows of light piercing through the darkness, as fresh crimson blood drips onto the cold floor of Herod's palace. In 1876, at the Salon exhibition in Paris, a priest collapsed and awoke in a state of panic, claiming that he had not merely looked upon a painting, but had stepped into a cursed space where the entity within was attempting to communicate through a mysterious ancient tongue. Since then, the reputation of the Bornturm, world's most haunting painting, has spread like a lethal poison, stifling the heartbeat of anyone daring to linger before it for too long. Why, after more than a century, do people still report a chill running down their spines? And the most stinging truth is this: are we admiring a work of fine art, or are we actually allowing our brains to be invaded by a visual trap, one triggered by genuine hallucinations occurring at this very moment? Today, join us as we decode the haunting mystery of one of the world's most unsettling masterpieces, The Apparition by Gustave Moreau. In the annals of art history, the tale of Salome and the martyrdom of St. John the Baptist has been rendered by masters like Caravaggio and Titian with raw realism. A severed, bloody head placed neatly upon a silver platter, a mere decorative object of brutality. However, Gustave Moreau executed a revolutionary pivot. He did not paint a physical object, but an apparition, an entity suspended on the threshold between reality and the spiritual realm. The most staggering feature is that the saint's head does not rest upon the charger. Instead, it hovers in mid-air, confronting Salome directly. A radiant, brilliant halo emanates from the head, illuminating the darkened corners of the palace. These rays are unlike natural sunlight. They appear as arrows of light piercing through space, symbolizing a holiness that judges sin. Simultaneously, fresh crimson blood seeps from the saint's neck and drips onto the floor, creating a chilling contrast between divine beauty and a catastrophic death. The eyes of the head are not closed in slumber, but are wide open, staring straight at Salome with a stern, soul-piercing gaze. Many analysts argue that the head is the embodiment of obsession. Salome, having fulfilled the cruel demand instigated by her mother, is consumed by her own terror. Standing before the head, she bears no sign of triumph. She is frozen, her arm outstretched as if both accusing and attempting to halt an advancing phantom. Perhaps Moreau intended to imply that sin never concludes with the stroke of a blade. Instead, it will always appear as psychological ghosts, incessantly judging the perpetrator with the light of the truth they sought to extinguish. It is this ambiguity that creates such an irresistible allure, transforming the painting into a symbol of the eternal struggle between secular desire and spiritual salvation. To illustrate the theory of sin manifesting as apparitions in the killer's mind, history records a shocking case involving King Charles IX of France. In 1572, under the heavy influence of his mother, Catherine de' Medici, the young king ordered the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, resulting in the deaths of thousands of Huguenots. Following that bloody event, Charles IX's life became a vivid illustration of Moreau's canvas. Though the massacre had physically ended, in the king's mind, it never ceased. Contemporary historians noted that just a few nights after the slaughter, the king began to hear heart-wrenching screams and the clash of weapons echoing through the corridors of the Louvre, despite the absolute silence of the space. More horrifyingly, Charles IX began to see apparitions of the victims. He described the faces of the deceased, with eyes fixed in judgment, hovering in the dark corners of his bedroom or shimmering behind velvet curtains. These entities possessed no complete physical form, but were often merely blood-stained faces emitting a cold aura, strangely similar to the way Moreau depicted the head of John the Baptist. This obsession caused the king's health to deteriorate rapidly. He frequently fell into a trance-like state, his limbs rigid and his eyes staring lifelessly into the void, mirroring Salome's posture in the painting. Before passing away at the age of 23, Charles IX screamed in agony, "Blood! Blood! I see them everywhere." This true story proves that when humans commit a brutal act beyond the endurance of conscience, the brain creates spiritual objects to punish itself. The hovering head in the apparition is the realization of that psychological mechanism, an inescapable judgment, suspended between reality and illusion. Although the original narrative concerns Saint John the Baptist, some researchers hypothesize that the head is actually a symbol of Christ himself. In the theology of that era, the death of John the Baptist was often viewed as a prelude to the crucifixion of Christ. Moreau's depiction of the radiant halo and the head's piercing gaze raises questions about a deeper religious synthesis. To understand why the head of John is often confused with or intentionally integrated into the image of Christ, we must travel back to the year 1204. Amidst the horrific smoke and fire of the Fourth Crusade in Constantinople, Salon de Sartène, a French cleric, was rummaging through the ruins of an ancient monastery. Amidst a space reeking of gunpowder, blood, and half-burnt incense, he discovered a large silver platter hidden behind a cracked stone wall. Upon the platter lay a skull encased in a thick layer of crystal, believed to be the facial relic of Saint John the Baptist. But as Salon brought his torch closer, a strange phenomenon occurred. Under the flickering light, the hollow eye sockets of the skull seemed to shift. For a moment, Salon did not see the face of the prophet of the wilderness. He saw the face of the man of sorrows. The cracks upon the skull appeared identical to the puncture wounds from Christ's crown of thorns. Salon brought this relic back to the Amiens Cathedral in France. There, for centuries, the faithful whispered that on nights of the blood moon, the aura from this relic shone so brilliantly it could pierce through the very marble of the crypt, much like the rays in Moreau's painting. Pilgrims claimed that when looking directly at the relic, they did not see a severed head, but a living entity judging the sins of the world. Clerics of that time explained that Christ and John the Baptist were two sides of a fated coin. John prepared the way for the Lord with his words, and he prepared the way for him with his very death. Therefore, the hovering head in the apparition is not merely the manifestation of an executed saint, it is a mirror reflecting the impending death of the Savior. Moreau, with a creative mind steeped in mysticism, perhaps borrowed this imagery to imply that Salome did not merely kill a man, she was attacking the very symbol of redemption itself. During the period when Moreau was creating this work, the 1870s, Paris was engulfed in a wave of opium use among the artistic circles. The dense, grotesque decorative details and the ethereal atmosphere of the painting lead many to suspect that Moreau painted it in a trance-like state. Although there is no direct evidence of his addiction, the suffocating style, otherwise known as horror vacui, the fear of empty spaces, within the canvas mirrors contemporary descriptions of opium hallucinations. This is a state where the artist refuses to leave even a single square millimeter of the frame vacant. Imagine your brain as a machine attempting to find an anchor amidst a storm of detail. Neuroscience refers to this as information density overload. Typically, the human eye requires resting points to identify a focal point and recover. But in the apparition, Moreau chokes off every visual exit with tens of thousands of tiny, interlacing motifs. When the visual cortex fails to find a stopping point, it enters a state of saturation, triggering a genuine physical reaction of anxiety and stress. It is not merely art, it is a direct assault on the nervous system, making the viewer feel as though the room itself is constricting in a heavy drug-induced stupor. To better grasp this sensation, imagine an evening in the basement of an ancient building in the Latin Quarter of Paris, 1874. Opium smoke, what Charles Baudelaire termed artificial paradises, shrouds the room like a thick, silver-gray fog. In that space, every law of physics is warped. There is an account from a close associate of the symbolist circle describing how, the moment the smoke invaded his lungs, his eyes no longer saw a smooth wall. Instead, every minor crack began to sprout into golden dragons and glistening jewels emerging from nothingness. In the apparition, Herod's palace is not mere brick and stone. It is a living entity constricting with thousands of minute patterns, or ornament layered upon ornament. The poet Théophile Gautier once wrote while experimenting with stimulants, "I saw rays of light emanating from inanimate objects, and every inch of space was filled with mystical geometries." This is precisely the gaze of someone in a state where the boundary between a grain of dust and a universe is erased. Moreau perfectly captured this splendid hell. A world where silence is murdered by millions of screaming details, and where darkness is not empty, but contains countless dancing phantoms. Herod's palace, indeed the apparition, does not belong to any specific geographical coordinate or time period on the human map. It is a grotesque hybrid entity, where Gustave Moreau performed a frantic marriage between heavy Byzantine columns, Hindu motifs reeking of sensuality, and the opulent Islamic lines of the Alhambra. Why create such a conflicting cultural melting pot? The answer lies in an extreme conviction. Lust and betrayal are eternal viruses, existing as parasites upon every civilization, from ancient temples to the most solemn cathedrals. In the late 19th century, Moreau's private studio at number 14, Rue de la Rochefoucauld, resembled not a common workshop, but a cathedral of chaos. Amidst walls covered in manuscripts, Moreau possessed thousands of hand-drawn sketches of collapsed temples, mystical reliefs from the Far East, and the ruins of long-vanished empires. He did not paint architecture from tangible reality. He extracted it from a forbidden book in his mind, where all religions meet at a single intersection: the fall. Imagine a freezing winter night. Moreau sits in solitude by candlelight, eyes fixed on an engraving of Angkor Wat, while his other hand sketches a Byzantine dome. He once asserted, "I am not painting a room in Jerusalem, I am painting a prison that humanity has built for thousands of years to lock away its soul." The architecture in The Apparition is an entity patched together from the souls of fallen civilizations. A Byzantine column represents the suffocating grip of dogma. A Hindu motif evokes a lethal sensuality, and the magnificent Islamic arches hint at the ultimate vanity of power. By blending them, Moreau performs a journey of decoding history. He proves that, regardless of the era when lust overwhelms conscience, humanity will always build identical splendid palaces, labyrinths where truth is executed and evil manifests in a brilliant halo. This conflict goes further than mere aesthetic patchwork. It is a deliberate, visual assault. The sturdy Byzantine columns that should offer a sense of security are instead strangled by the wickedly sinuous curves of pagan deities. This collision between order and chaos generates an extreme spiritual frequency, making the palace space seem to contract rhythmically with the very breath of the devil. Those splendid domes are, in fact, light traps, where darkness is compressed to a point of density, clinging to Salome's dancing feet like a lethal liquid. Moreau encoded into every brick and every pattern the ciphers of collapse. Standing before the canvas, the viewer does not see a static structure, but a cultural vortex swallowing all notions of time. Herod's palace is no longer a historical landmark. It is a transcontinental museum of sin, radiating the phosphorescent glow of corpses and the heavy warmth of blood. This is the eternal labyrinth where humanity imprisons itself, where Salome dances forever upon the tiles of every civilization that has ever collapsed due to betrayal. Amidst a courtly space as magnificent yet somber as a stone tomb, Salome emerges like an entity so radiant she seems out of place. Her body, partially veiled and partially exposed, glows intensely under the aura emanating from the hovering head, trembling in a state of psychological paralysis. That outstretched arm carries the air of a royal command, yet simultaneously serves as an instinctive defensive reflex against a power that has surpassed the control of the flesh. Moreau did not paint a woman triumphant over the corpse of her enemy. He exposed a soul being torn asunder between courtly glory and an invisible realm of judgment. Astonishment consumes every line of the young girl's face. Salome's eyes have entirely forgotten the silver platter containing her tangible trophy, instead fixing upon a hovering presence that demands a debt from her soul with a gaze that pierces to the core. In this moment, the boundary between an evildoer and a victim of cruel conspiracies suddenly blurs. Salome is no longer the master of the feast, but a puppet falling into a trance, realizing she has inadvertently touched an inescapable loop of sin. That stunned gaze is, in truth, a clairvoyance that pierces through time, signaling the grim end that would take place in the freezing lands of Gaul many years later. On a winter afternoon, as the sun faded, Salome crossed the frozen Secarus River, and the ice cracked like the jaws of a demon. She fell through into the biting water, but did not sink completely. Two large slabs of ice slammed shut like pincers, gripping her neck right at the water's surface. Suspended between the gray sky and the current of death, Salome began to perform the final dance of her life. It was no longer the sensual dance exchanged for the head of a saint, but the desperate rotation of death. The struggling movements of her legs beneath the water caused her body to twirl, while the jagged edges of the ice began to saw into her flesh with every frantic breath. At the moment her head was severed from her body and drifted away across the ice, Salome's soul once again beheld the radiant apparition of John the Baptist, hovering in the void, exactly as Moreau had eternalized with his brush. It turns out that Salome's gaze in the painting is not directed at reality. She is looking directly into her own future. Moreau captured the moment her soul was forever imprisoned in a fated sentence where she is executed by nature itself and the torment of conscience. Moreau's Salome is a soul that died while her feet were still dancing, an existence held captive in eternal horror. In 1876, as it emerged from the mystical mists of the Salon exhibition, the apparition received more than just applause. It endured a wave of silent prohibition fueled by the Church's horror. The Cardinal Archbishop of Paris at the time tremblingly labeled the work an illusion from the depths of hell, a blasphemous entity that needed to be purged from public sight. Yet, this very rejection transformed the painting into a magnet for frenzied curiosity. Hidden behind the vibrant brushstrokes lay the phantom of the Theosophical Society. Eerie rumors from Val-de-Grâce Street claimed that Gustave Moreau had dipped his brush into an oil refined from the ashes of ancient Egyptian artifacts. His purpose was not merely to paint, but to create a colossal amulet to summon negative energies from the past. In the winter of 1877, Father Louis Vanel, a fierce detractor of the painting, secretly broke into a collector's residence to perform an exorcism on the canvas. The following morning, the priest was found convulsing at the base of the painting. In his delirium, he incessantly uttered rasping syllables in ancient Hebrew, a language he had never previously known. The nightmare did not end there. The painting's subsequent owner also fell into the abyss of paranoia. Precisely at 3 a.m., the hovering head of St. John seemed to escape the two-dimensional plane, whispering in Hebrew the most private sins the owner sought to hide. Occult scholars believe that Moreau utilized hidden geometry combined with Byzantine architecture to create a specific visual frequency. It did not merely deceive the eye, it triggered auditory hallucinations, warping the observer's reality. Eventually, to preserve his remaining sanity, the collector had to hide this masterpiece behind a thick black velvet curtain, separating the real world from the halo curse that was strangling his mind. A confidential report from the Council for the Investigation of Anomalous Phenomena revealed that during 40 nights of monitoring the painting in total darkness, the halo around the saint's head was never still. It glowed spontaneously and pulsated in sync with the observer's breath, like a living creature lying in wait. Further research indicates that Moreau applied the inverse golden ratio, a mathematical structure considered cursed in ancient architecture, to distort spatial perception. Even when obscured by velvet, witnesses adamantly claimed to see a crimson light, dark as blood, seeping from the edges of the fabric, casting grotesque shadows upon the walls. The apparition is not, in fact, a painting. It is a gateway where the hovering head stands guard at the boundary between the living and the dead. Anyone brave enough or mad enough to stare into those eyes for too long will inadvertently leave a piece of their soul within that multi-religious labyrinth, never to escape. To truly grasp the radical uniqueness of Moreau, one must place the apparition in direct dialogue with contemporary depictions of the same theme. While Henri Reynaud rendered a radiant, sensual Salome with warm, carnal skin pulsing with vitality, and Caravaggio captured a raw, visceral crime scene defined by blood and cold steel, Moreau chose the path of a psychic medium. The Salomes of his peers are women of flesh and bone committing a physical act of murder. Moreau's Salome is a phantom imprisoned within her own hallucination. This comparison illuminates Moreau's extreme symbolist philosophy. In 1884, the writer Joris Karl Huysmans immortalized this painting in his novel A Rebours, describing Salome as a deity of corruption, an entity that has transcended all conventional moral boundaries. Where other artists localize the drama in the action, the precise moment the blade meets the throat, Moreau shifted the focus to the eternal, spiritual consequence. In his vision, Salome does not even touch the silver platter. It hovers in midair like an anti-gravity object, a detail that flagrantly defies every law of physics. This serves as irrefutable proof that the scene does not unfold in the tangible physical realm, but in a distorted dimension, warped by the immense pressure of sin and terminal paranoia. The light, the apparition, does not originate from an external source. It emanates from within the saint's severed head, radiating outward like a diamond spiderweb. This is a cold, judgmental energy that transforms Salome's jewel-encrusted attire into thousands of sharp thorns piercing inward, back into her own conscience. Occultists of the era went as far as to propose a chilling conspiracy theory, that Moreau engineered this painting as a deliberate, visual trap. They argued that the intricate Byzantine architectural lines were not merely decorative, but functioned as a dark mystical diagram, a form of occult feng shui, designed to lock the viewer's gaze into the central halo, inducing a genuine sensation of vertigo and psychic disorientation. An agonizing question remains. Why did Moreau intentionally abandon carnal beauty to construct such a horrific illusion? The answer is buried in a shocking event from 1870. Before laying his first brushstrokes, Moreau reportedly gained secret access to the crypt of Amiens Cathedral to touch the skull relic of St. John. A crypt keeper recounted that as Moreau's hand met the crystal casing, the artist's eyes rolled erratically in a ghostly manner, as if he were perceiving a light invisible to the mortal eye. It was rumored that, in that instant, Moreau heard a death vibration from the relic, an infrasound frequency that modern research suggests can trigger profound trance-like states. A persistent conspiracy within French occult circles asserts that the Amiens relic acts as a receiver for the psychic memory of the final moments before decapitation. Did Moreau perhaps transcribe exactly what the relic transmitted to his brain? An entity stripped of physical form, a hovering head that is untouchable yet radiates the terrifying authority of an ultimate judge. This explains why Moreau's Salome appears paralyzed with a supernatural horror, a stark contrast to the cold, human indifference found in the Salomes of Caravaggio's world. Beneath the magnificent splendor of Herod's palace lies a chilling secret that only modern technology has been able to uncover. X-ray and infrared analyses conducted at the Musée Gustave Moreau in Paris have revealed the existence of a third entity in the initial sketches. This was not a human figure, but a distorted form with long, razor-sharp claws lurking in the deep shadows directly behind Herod's throne, reaching out toward Salome's neck. Many critics argue that Moreau's decision to remove this entity was an aesthetic choice to emphasize the emptiness of sin. However, technical reports from the 1998 restoration, confirmed by the former museum director Geneviève Lacombe, point to a darker truth. Moreau did not simply paint over it. He performed a sealing ritual by layering over that silhouette with more than 40 coats of extremely thin glaze interlaced with layers of shellac and a specific black pigment refined from the soot of burnt mystical scriptures. According to scattered entries in Moreau's personal journals, he believed that by imprisoning this dark entity beneath dozens of color layers, he would ensure it could never escape into the physical world. Yet, this transformed it into a spiritual obsession that weighs heavily on the consciousness of anyone standing before the painting. A conspiracy theory circulating among Parisian conservators asserts that Moreau intentionally blended extracts of molten mandrake root into the final glaze at the corner of the throne. When a viewer focuses on the painting in a silent space, The extreme density of visual information from the jewel-encrusted motifs, combined with the chemical remnants on the surface, triggers a chemical reaction in the cerebral cortex. This visual overload was not merely an artistic style, it was a tool for psychological manipulation. A thrilling anecdote tells of a secret bishop from the Vatican who visited Moreau's studio in 1895. After standing before this masterpiece for 3 full hours, the bishop collapsed and required emergency medical care. In his delirium, he spoke incessantly of a web of souls hidden beneath the ornaments of the god Jupiter. It is believed that Moreau encoded ancient symbols from occult sects into the painting, secrets he acquired during his silent journeys to the East. Thank you for joining me on today's journey of decoding. Art is a mirror reflecting the deepest, most hidden corners of the soul. What Gustave Moreau left behind in The Apparition are stinging, unanswered questions regarding the boundary between sin and redemption. If you feel drawn to this seductive yet terrifying world, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so we can continue our journey of decoding the darkest secrets of art in our upcoming videos.